Welcome once again to Fantasy Fiction Focus. Our guest today is Krista D Ball, a science fiction and fantasy writer currently resident in Edmonton. So welcome to the show.
Hello.
As you can see, Krista's a very jolly person there, looking very, very happy and jolly for today because she writes a lot of science fiction and fantasy and things. Also, author, I should mention this, of the Tranquility series, the Spirit Caller series. You also write romance books, short stories, and also some guides for writers as well. All of this is included, of course, on her website. You can find all this stuff about her and everything. So, but first, I wanted to ask you quickly here: how long have you been doing this writing gig? And is it something you always wanted to do when you were growing up?
Yeah, I think when I was like 12 or something, I got like a typewriter and I started writing. I was like, oh, I actually really like this, and I kind of like didn't stop. But I didn't, like when you're a teenager, you write, really bad poetry, and then you move on to really bad novels. So I went through that phase. But when I hit 30. I was like, I haven't done really anything, and so either I need to do this or stop dreaming about it. So when I turned 30, that was when I made the choice that I'm actually going to start writing.
Now, do you still have any of this very bad poetry and these very bad novels that you can share with your readers today, or have they been burnt and hidden forever?
One of the novels actually was in a house fire, so that one's gone. But I actually do have some of the very bad poetry and some of the very bad short stories. A couple weeks ago, I was actually live tweeting them, and they were really bad.
Well, I think you tend to find that when we look back at stuff anyway. I think the first things you ever wrote, even when you were first starting to send things out to publishers, are probably very different to what you're doing now, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, like the first book I ever wrote was the first book of the Tranquility series, and some people, that's not where they started reading me, so they started reading some of my most recent stuff, and then when they go back and decide to start from the beginning and read, I've had them comment like, "Wow, that's definitely, I can tell it's your first book," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's because it is."
Well, you were developing as a writer, I guess, all the time. Now, when you were growing up, of course, you grew up in off the coast in Newfoundland and in Edmonton. But the Tranquility series is paranormal, I believe, and it's set in Newfoundland, the whole series.
The Spirit Caller series.
Oh, sorry, yes, that one, yes.
Yeah, so that one's set in northern Newfoundland, so around the L'Anse Meadows area where the Vikings landed. So it's in that area, and town of 20 people. So I jokingly recall it the rural fantasy as opposed to urban fantasy.
And this was, when did that come out? The first one of that come out?
Oh heavens, I don't remember. A few years ago. I think it's been 3 years.
Oh, okay, so not too long ago. And this is so. Did you have? I suppose I should ask this. Did you have any paranormal experiences while living in isolated communities in Newfoundland? Whilst growing up?
I didn't, but everybody knows somebody who has had one in Newfoundland. It's kind of just like a part of the culture. It's not even a big deal. It's just like, especially even amongst like some of the older people, you hear them talk and they're like, "Don't say stuff like that. I mean, oh, she's gonna come back and haunt you for that," and it's just not a big deal. It's very different.
Now, you mentioned also being in the area near where the Viking settlements were. Does that feature in the series at all?
Yeah, in one of the in the first book, actually, a kid is trying to raise the courage that the Vikings had to help him defend himself against bullies, but he found the spell on the internet and accidentally raised the Vikings from the dead.
Well, we can't talk too much about it, otherwise people don't have books. And we don't want that. But so this is paranormal, obviously. So this is something have you included paranormal elements in some of your other work?
No, this is kind of a different one. Like I do like the traditional epic fantasy where it's like, the magic, the gods, the meddling gods, that sort of thing, right? The elves, the pointed ears, and that stuff, so kind of like that traditional stuff. But this is the Spirit series is the first time I've really gone and tried to do the paranormal feel to it, with the ghosts and the spirits and that sort of thing.
And the Spirit Core series is how many books in that?
So there's 4 right now. It's going to be 6 total. So number 5 is coming out around Christmas, and number 6 early in the new year, and then that's it for the series.
Oh yeah, so I was going to ask you about it. What's on the go? Because knowing you reasonably well, I know you've usually got something on the go every hour of every day, except when you're asleep. Well, maybe when you're asleep too. I'm not sure.
Probably.
So 6 books in total for that one. Now the other thing we mentioned was epic fantasy too, which is the Tranquility series is epic fantasy. Yeah, what you mentioned there, elves and swords and quests and all that sort of good stuff, and castles and things, right?
Yes. It's I do explore definitely the darker side of things with that one. So it's the Spirit series is very much kind of fun and silly. Whereas the epic fantasy, I mean, the main character, she's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So I don't shy away from that end at all. So it definitely is darker.
Now, obviously, you're obviously a fan of this genre, otherwise you wouldn't be writing in the epic fantasy genre, and probably historical fiction stuff too. But you've also created a guide, of course, which I've seen. I should read it at some point, but I have seen it and flicked through it. And it's called, I'll just tell people, it's called What Kings Ate and What Wizards Drank. An interesting title. What is that about? And before you answer, why did you decide to write this book?
I wrote it because I got tired of people asking me all the same questions, and it was like, there needs to be a book for this, because like I would get on a weekly basis the same questions from people. How do I write food? What do people eat on a ship? How do people preserve food when there isn't a refrigerator? And like really basic food questions. And so that's kind of I started to write it to help with that. And then I realized that there was a lot of readers who read these genres, who read historical books like Bernard Cornwell, like a Sharp series, or who read epic fantasy, or who read like Highland romances and Regency romances, and they also want to read about the worlds that these books are set in. And so I set out on this ambitious plan to write a writer's guide that readers would love.
Well, there seems to be quite a few guides to things like, I've done some medieval ones too, and fantasy type stuff, and there's a lot of guides, places to find stuff about weaponry, swords especially, and horses and saddles and clothing and things. But yeah, the food thing, what people actually used to live like, yes, it would have been a welcome book for people to see available. So is it doing well? Is it popular?
Yes, it is. I think we've sold, I can't remember, I think it's something like 4,000 copies or something like that now. And it is popular, and it hits a spot for people to really think about different things, because I don't just talk about rich people in medieval castles in England. I do talk about what poor people live like, and what people in other eras lived like, and what an everyday worker in Rome would have eaten. And I talk about North America, and so I really do try to spread it around a bit and bring in other ideas, because I think that fantasy in general could use with a little bit of extra, moving past the medieval castle period.
Yeah, I suppose, yes. I suppose to point out to anybody watching this who's not familiar with what all this sort of implies, is that it's not just historical knowledge, because obviously most of these epic fantasies are set in a medieval setting. So obviously it's important to say, well, obviously we're not going to have, King Richard III going to check his email, or or Richard the Lionheart, checking his text messages. We know all that, but what did they eat? Yes, exactly. Because obviously no fridges, but certain eating potatoes before they were discovered could be a big mistake, right? Yes,
the potato one is always big, and also how things like salted meat and things like that, people don't understand how the existence of salted meat and then how to cook it. Like, I grew up eating salted meat and salt fish, and so I realized that like there's like a whole like that's just common knowledge for me, but most people wouldn't have a clue what to do with a hunk of salt beef, whereas I'm like, oh, I know exactly what to do. And so that was a really great chance for me to explain how that stuff worked and how it tastes and how long it cooks and how to make it, you know, not gross.
Now, I don't want to be, if this is a spoiler for the book, you know, let me know, but I'm sure there is definitely something in the book, something to do with marinating animals, dead animals in beer or something, isn't there?
It's called cock ale. So I made almost all of the recipes in the book, either or I've eaten them before, like the seal flipper pie. I've never made, but I've eaten. And but the cock ale I didn't make. And so basically it's like beer, but then you like take chicken and spices, and then you soak the chicken in with the beer to make it a bit greasy. And I'm like, ew.
Well, it could be just the same as marinating something in beer, perhaps, would it? Like, or in wine or something? Or do they drink the beer as well, or do they throw that out?
Oh no, it's to drink the beer.
Oh,
They throw the chicken out afterwards. The chicken's raw. Yeah, no, they drink the beer.
well, they were very strange back in those times, weren't they? Quite clearly. And you haven't actually been tempted to make this recipe and drink this beer?
No, my family, they've been good about everything else I've done, but they put a veto on that one and said we are not going to have a vat of beer with the dead chicken soaking in it.
Well, which is a bit short-sighted of them, perhaps, but each to their own. Now, so this has been obviously very good for fantasy writers to learn all this stuff. But you also have delved into, you followed this up with not a sequel about or part two about the same era. Another era that's very popular, which is the Victorian, was it, or something like that? They're called what's it called? Hustlers, Harlots, and Heroes. Another interesting title. What era does that cover?
So that is mostly going to be, it really does hyper-focus on the Regency era and the Victorian era in London specifically, but I do spread it out a bit to cover all of the Georges, as I call it. So sometimes I go as early as like 1710 and go to about 1899.
And is this food as well or not? Not just food, is it? This is like lifestyle.
Yeah, there's a little bit about food in there because you can't talk about people without talking about food sometimes. But it's mostly to talk about everyday people and what that looked like. I think sometimes we think that everybody in a Jane Austen novel is representative of the era, and that's not true at all. And so I really show like how. Like in Pride and Prejudice, people often talk about how Lizzie Bennet is poor. Lizzie Bennet is not poor at all. And so I talk about who really is poor in that era. And I also do talk about slavery. I do talk about racial diversity in London. I talk about the working class, the servant class. And so it's really about the people that we don't often really think about in literature.
But obviously, those people did exist, yes, because obviously we always see these movies and books, and yes, all these people lived in fancy houses, and I mean they were impoverished, of course. These people in Pride and Prejudice, they were impoverished because they couldn't make a good marriage, perhaps, or they didn't have as much money as the guy who owned half of Wales or something. But yeah. This book must be quite refreshing because obviously the steampunk genre is a bit later though, isn't it? That's set usually in late Victorian times.
Yeah, and so so it kind of appeals to a lot of different people. So for some people, those who want to write a little bit more historical background into their steampunk, it does allow them to make sure that they got their servants right and kind of that side of things. Then for like people who are writing like the romances and things, it does help with kind of getting that basis of what's going on around, you know, your Regency buck and his recently widowed heroine, and so it does cover. And I mean, it is impossible to write a 300-page book and cover London and the people who live in it, over the course of almost 200 years, and really dive into it. So, I mean, it does only do the cursory look, but for some people, they didn't even realize that. Like during Jane Austen's time, 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 women participated in the sex trade in London. And even knowing that is kind of like has been stunning for some people.
So the sex trade is mentioned in this book. I see. So it's spicy stuff, is it?
Yeah, so I actually have a whole chapter that talks about prostitution because it was how a lot of women made ends meet.
Literally, probably, yes. Making ends meet. Yes, I suppose it is. But anyway, enough of that. We shouldn't delve into that too much. But so are you considering doing another guide like this for maybe a different era as well, or have you sort of done with that for now?
I haven't made a decision yet.
Because what would be just if you did? I'm just curious now. What would you've done medieval and fantasy thing, and you've covered the Georgian era, Regency, Jane Austen, Victoria. What would be a logical thing? How the Romans lived, maybe, or early 20th century, perhaps? I don't know.
I think if I do another one, I'm going to focus more on a specific things as opposed to a time period. So I've gotten so many people giving me enough suggestions that I could write 30 books on it. But like some people suggested transportation or warfare or those or clothing even and or housing and those types of things. So I mean, there's a lot for me to consider from.
Yeah, I've seen a few clothing guys. I think I actually had a board one of clothing, I think, years ago, just to do my own research. And there's quite a few on weaponry and warfare. But I think the refreshing thing about the one you did was about the food, especially. But I'd never seen something like before. Maybe there are books that exist, but I've not sort of seen one before. Now, so you have what have you got something coming out in the near future, or what is the most recent book you've done first? What's the most recent one that's come out?
So the one that I had a book come out in February, it's called Interlude. So that's that was 3 short stories set in the Tranquility series. It was kind of just to tie up some things that readers have always wanted me to deal with, so I did. And then the third like novel of the series comes out in May. Oh, next month.
Yes, it is. It's April now already. So okay, but that's obviously coming out. It means it's done. It's finished. It's out of your hands. It's in the design stage and everything.
Yeah.
So what are you working on at the moment?
So I'm working on the Tranquility series is ending this year, and so I'm ending it with a novella to tie up loose ends left over from the book that comes out next month, because technically, so it is a war series, so the entire series is about war, and so kind of the novella I'm writing right now is to tie up all the loose ends left over from that. I'm also writing another Jane Austen adaptation. This time, this one's Sense and Sensibility. And I'm working on a new, I have to look at my chart on the wall here. What else am I working on? Oh, and I am working on I'm going to be starting a new epic fantasy series next year. And so I'm just starting on that this year.
Couple of questions there, because I hadn't mentioned the Jane Austen thing, because you did produce a modern day adaptation based on, or inspired by Pride and Prejudice. I remember you talking about that. So that came out, was that last year or the year before?
2012.
Okay, so that one's out, and then but then this one now it's Sense and Sensibility is the next one. Are you going to continue adapting Jane Austen? Are you a fan of Jane Austen? Is that what it's all about?
Actually, now I think it was 2013 I did it, not 2000. You know what? I don't remember when I wrote it. I wrote it sometime. But no, I'm a huge fan of Jane Austen, and one of the things. So when I wrote, so my book is called First Wrong Impressions, and when I wrote that one, I actually didn't even realize that there was this entire Jane Austen fan fiction world. I just wrote this book. I didn't even think about that there was like this really intense readership that reads those books, and so I kind of like offended the expectations of that genre, because I didn't realize that there were expectations of it. But that's fine. I don't mind. I'm very happy. I set that in like inner city work. Here in Edmonton, I worked in the inner city, and I worked with programs with a drop-in center, and so I wrote about the social class issues that are in Austin's books, but in today's time. And so I've decided to go on, and I'm going to keep writing them. So I'm going to do Sense and Sensibility this year, and then next year I'm going to do. I'm hoping to do Mansfield Park and Northanger Abbey next year.
Right, these will all be adaptations from based on the plot set in the modern day. Will they be? Are they based in Edmonton or just in the modern sort of Western world?
So the first one is based in Edmonton, but Lizzie Bennett moves to Calgary, and so the others are going to be based out of Calgary, and then some come back to Edmonton because, you know, everybody has friends back and forth in all these different places. And so, but the core of the series is now going to be set in an office building in downtown Calgary.
And I'm curious here. This is very interesting. Fan fiction, of course, we're familiar with it, what it is. Well, actually, maybe some people watching this won't be familiar with what fan fiction is. So a couple of questions here. What exactly is fan fiction? And why would you, doing what you did with Pride, why did that offend people? Like the purists, I suppose. So if you could answer that, that'd be fascinating.
Well, like so in fan fiction, it's like, you know, rewriting or adding on or, you know, adapting or different ways of something that already exists. And so some people do it. It's quite popular to do with TV shows and that sort of thing. But for me, I really wanted to. Jane Austen has some universal themes, and so I wanted to take those universal themes and try to modernize them to see how that looked. The problem is that I swear like a pirate at times, and so I very much did. I do, and so I swear a lot in those books, and they talk about things that you don't usually talk about when you talk about Jane Austen. There's this idea that Jane Austen's books are clean and they're sweet romances, and Jane Austen's books weren't clean. I mean, everybody had an illegitimate child and were having affairs, and there's gay jokes in her books. I mean, her books are dirty, but you know, and so I really kind of stuck with the history and the themes of it, and then made them modernized, which can be a little bit jarring, I think, hearing Lizzie Bennett tell Darcy, you know, to go bleep himself. So.
I see. So I don't think you need to answer the second part of that as to why purists would too happy with you. Now, you mentioned your readers a few times and everything, and so you are quite active. I think some writers are, some writers aren't. You're quite active with your readers. You reply to comments and things and engage, and you're a big Twitterer. I think you're quite a big twit. You're on there all the time, and you're constantly retweeting things and engaging. Do you engage a lot with your readers, and do you find that fulfilling and worthwhile?
Yeah, so I'm lucky in that, like, some people have a hard time with the online kind of interaction, and so, but I don't, and so in fact, I have an easier time sometimes interacting with people online than I do in person, and so I generally just try to be myself online, and because I write the types of things I do, it's almost good that if I'm slightly offensive in social media, because it does help weed through people who will be horribly offended by anything I write, and so that does help me. But I try to engage as much as I can with my readers online. I'm getting bad with keeping up with fan mail these days, but I do still try to respond to everybody as best I can, even if it's only just a couple of lines. But if people tweet me or Facebook message me, I do try really hard, even if I just say thanks so much. I do try to keep up with that.
And it's very important. I think it is. These people have, after all, they bought your books. I mean, that's what enables you to write these insulting Jane Austen adaptations for years to come. Now, you also engage people, of course, in person. You are going to be. I'm not sure when this video is going to be aired, but you are a presenter at the Calgary. I think it's called officially the Comic and Entertainment Expo, which happens every April, and at the current moment of this filming of this, it's coming up. So, what sort of things do you talk about at this big event?
So this year, I'm going to be doing a different talk. So most years I do the Medieval Feasting Planning 101, where I take the entire audience and turn them into a medieval feast, and I talk about the social strata, and we have kind of this big interactive, great time. But this year I'm going to be doing something different. So this year it's called Dinner with Mr. Darcy, and so I'm going to be doing a Regency dinner party.
Oh, so sort of based on the idea of the medieval food thing, but in a Regency setting.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and so because I asked the organizers, and so they decided to go with that one because I've done the medieval one a couple of years in a row now, and so let's try to do something different. Because I mean, there's 60,000 people who come. There's so many different people who want to listen to different things, and so want to do a different one this year. So we're going to be doing a Regency dinner party. I think it's going to be a lot of fun because I'm going to be trying to tie in 2 books into one talk. So definitely been working on that.
And that, of course, is very worthwhile for you because I've witnessed this happening in person, in that people watch you and listen to you in your presentation. Obviously, you're very engaging in things, but then they do come to the booth and they do buy the books, and they're very happy to buy the books. So it does seem to work. You must be a good presenter then, I guess.
Well, I've had a lot of practice, so it does get easier with time. I tend to be always, the first time I do a new talk, I always find it's a bit rough because it's the first time to see where everybody is in a talk, kind of where the audience is, right? And sometimes when I'm new to doing a particular topic, I'm not able to adjust on the fly to what the audience needs as well as when I've kind of settled into a talk, and I've done it a couple of times. With the medieval one, I can definitely, on the fly, if everybody there is a D&D player and is there specifically for help with their D&D campaigns, I can switch on the fly and do that. I've only done the kind of the Regency one only once so far, and so the first time I did it, I had a hard time on the fly because everybody there, most of them hadn't actually read Jane Austen, and so that was really tough, trying to do a Regency one with nobody who understood what it was. And so so this is going to be fun because I've worked out a lot of the kinks this time now.
Well, I think a lot of people, not every writer does presentations. A lot of people do readings and things like that. I think it's if you've got something you can talk about, like you do, like you have with these guides for writers, it helps. And I know I do presentations. It's easy for me to do presentations on some books, but not others. But I think if people have just written novels, they might have a problem wondering how they can do a presentation, and they might want to sit there and be asked questions. But some people aren't comfortable with that, so it's good that you're able to do that, and it helps with visibility for you, I guess, and of course with sales.
Well, yeah, and I mean, because we've shared a booth before, and so it's you've seen I've done a talk, and then there's a lineup of 20 people waiting to talk to me, and it's a half an hour to clear a table because I'm trying to get through to everybody and talk to them, right? And so it's really great, and it's. And I'm able to usually answer people's questions. So people often come with questions, and so I'm well enough on the topic that on the general topics that I either know the answer or I know which book to go for them to go and read and find. So that helps because then people feel like they've engaged with somebody.
Yes, they've engaged with the famous author, Krista D Ball, which of course I have done as well today, and so have all my millions of viewers. So I guess we should probably wrap things up here because I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have writing to do. Do you have some writing to do?
Yeah, I probably should get around to that.
Well, you are a writer professionally, so you should probably do that. So thank you, Krista, for being our guest here today. It's been a wonderful experience having you here. We wish you all the best with the upcoming projects and, of course, with the expo coming up. And once again, thank you for being here with us on Fantasy Fiction Focus.
Thank you.